Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Welcome to Facts and Two Cents. This is Petal. Hope you are all well wherever you are. Happy Monday. Talk about happy. I have been reading this book, and this is not a happy book by any stretch of the imagination. I've been reading this book, A Very Private School, from Charles Spencer, who is Princess Diana's brother, Prince Harry's uncle, who is very dear uncle to Prince Harry, and to be honest, to William as well. But we saw just how much support that him and his sisters, Princess Diana's family, a side of the family, have given to our faves, and it's been really, really wonderful to see. But I have been reading Charles Spencer's book about his time as a child from 8 to about 13 years old at the Madewell boarding school. Boys that, as we talked about in the last episode where I talked about this, it was a boarding school basically for training the next officers of the empire. And it was a very stark understanding of what boarding schools are about. It was very alarming and shocking. I didn't never thought of that, and I never realized that's what those boarding schools were for those aristos in the UK. And so reading through it has been really like, whoa, this is awful. Some of the things that he experienced, not just him, but some of his classmates, some of his peers that went to the school as well, who all, not all, but some of them have reconnected with him, and he is reconnected with them. And from their shared experiences, he decided to write this book. Basically, he said to reclaim his childhood in that school, and also to remember what he went through, which could be the cause of some of the issues that's going on in his life right now. And so he just created, when now I think he's in therapy and all of that stuff, trying to get help to process and to be able to hopefully heal from the trauma of that time. And so it's very interesting. As I was reading through it, I'm almost close to the end, but some of the things I'm going to talk about is I literally didn't know about, and I had to jump ahead, so I have to go back now and finish and read through to that part. But because of some stuff that came out recently, and I'll get to that in a bit. And so, but the very, very interesting thing that I discovered while reading this book is how similar some of his experiences are, and also how his coping mechanism, the things that he used to try to cope with some of the traumas that he experienced at Madewell School, is how similar it is to Princess Diana and how she tried to cope with being married into the royal family, being married to a prince that really didn't love her and really treated her appallingly, and going from someone from relative obscurity, even though she was an aristo, she lived a private life, to be thrown into the deep end of this monarchy with all the expectations on her, being married to a man that didn't love her, that she knew right away was having an affair with the woman that he actually loved, and then having the press completely go after her, and trying to cope with all of those things, and seeing how similar it is, the both of them, how they try to cope with all of that craziness, and how they try to cope with the upheaval in their life, and the abuse and the torture that they felt, and not only felt but was doled out to them in situations that it was just like, oh my gosh, give me a moment to figure out and get my bearings. And in a lot of ways, Charles Spencer, the same thing. He had, at least with his dad, a very loving dad, and even though his mom, it was from a broken home in the sense that his mom left and went off and married someone else. His relationship with his dad was very loving, even though their nannies were very abusive. His relationship with his dad was loving, and the family around them was loving it, with whether the extended family, like the grandparents and all of those things, and being ripped, that all of those stripped out from under him at 8 years old and thrown into this school that was abusive in so many ways. How he dealt with that, it was so, again, so similar with how him and his situation and Diana's situation, how they cope with it was just so similar. And so it just is, I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't know Charles Spencer's life before, and we knew about Princess Diana because she told her stories to Andrew Morton, who wrote this book, Diana: A True Story, and also to Martin Bashir in his in that now infamous interview for the BBC, which is now in a vault somewhere, locked away, never to be seen again. And so from this book, I'm going to be reading clips from this book and also Charles Spencer's book. But very, very interested. And so one of the things that I learned that was so mirroring each other in how they cope is this situation. And I'm going to move my banner. So if you have not subscribed to our channel, go ahead and subscribe, click the notification bell so that you know when we drop a video. Please like and share this video and join our channel if you have not already. So I will bring this back hopefully at the end if I remember. So a little bit, a clip of this situation and how similar it is with how he dealt with it and how Diana dealt with hers. It says, the fears in my first year at Madewell reached a climax on Sunday, May 20th, 1973, my 9th birthday. All pupils had an hour's lie-in on Sunday mornings, but I woke up at my usual time. As I lay there, it slowly dawned on me that this would be the first occasion on which I'd celebrate my birthday while away from my parents. I'm going to jump to another clip. It says, my unhappiness that morning deepened as I lay there in enforced silence. I thought about how my mother liked to say how sweet I was, warmly to my face and proudly to others. And then I suddenly had a ghastly thought. By turning 9, I must surely be exiting that phase when a boy can be considered sweet and be entering into no man's land between childhood and teenage years, where sweetness surely had no place. If I was no longer sweet, I asked myself, my heart beating faster, how could my mother still love me? And I'm going to read some more clips that are not on this, obviously on this slide. It says, in my terror at maternal rejection, I found those pots, the chamber pots under his bed. I found these pots useful for the first time. After lights out, I waited till the rest of the dormitory fell asleep, then silently lifted the pot from under the bed and placed it between my thighs. I hunched over the pot and opened my mouth wide, sticking 2 fingers of my right hand down my throat, till I found the point at the back that made me gag, retch, and throw up. These are other clips. It's obvious to me now, but it wasn't then, that my making myself sick was a desperate attempt to get somebody adult to show me warmth and sympathy, and to give me some care and attention. It was an emotional cry for help and an effort to exert an element of control over a life that was so out of control. But I was incapable of understanding or communicating such complicated thoughts when age 9. Shoving my finger down my throat remained my nighttime default whenever I was consumed by loneliness or unhappiness at Madewell, which was often. Not once during my 5 years do I remember Granny Ford looking at me with kindness, a smile, or a glimmer of compassion. And Charles talked about just so much missing that maternal love that he got from his mother and grandmother and all of those things. Just in case you haven't read the book, Granny Four that he's referring to is one of the matrons there, like the head matron there, and who was just so harsh and just so unforgiving and just brutal to him and many of the boys. But with the lack of having a mom there, having the love of his mom there and all of that stuff, she was the one that he was looking to for some kind of motherly or female acceptance or love or compassion, something warm and soft for him. And as an 8-year-old, there was nothing. And a 9-year-old, he had just turned 9 years old there was nothing. And him making himself throw up, as you said, from it became a regular thing. Him doing that every night, he would always have to go and present his pot. That's how they did it in school to her. And in all that time, he was doing that. And every time he did it, had to present it to her. Not one time did she have any kind of compassion or even consider, well, why is this child throwing up every single night or all this time? Nothing, not 1 ounce of empathy. Nor was she even equipped to do it. Neither was the entire school equipped, as I mentioned before. He had mentioned in another part of the book that the school was simply not there for the benefit of a child. It wasn't there to help the child. It was there to groom them into becoming officers of the empire. And that's one of the form of cruelty. And this is a way that he, at 9 years old, coped or tried to cope with the horror of being in this situation where he thought not only did he lose his home, lost his father, the thought of losing his mom and his love of his mom because he turned 9, at least that's, in his 9-year-old thinking. At 9, he's no longer the cute kid. He's no longer this sweet, adorable person. Well, since he's no longer 8 and cute and adorable, then surely his mom can't love him anymore. And so the loss of what he thought was the loss of that, he dealt with it by making himself throw up all the time. And it's very interesting because as we remember Princess Diana's story, going back, as we remember how she tried to cope with, in a sort of similar way, being thrown in to the deep ends of the monarchy, coming from relative obscurity again. Even though she was an aristo, she had a private life, and then all of a sudden being engaged to this prince and future king and being thrown into the role as without much help from the royal family into a situation where her husband is in love with someone else and she's desperately trying to somehow stand on her own 2 feet and just failing miserably because of all that was thrown at her at the same time. This is what she talked about in the Diana, Her True Story, in her own words by Andrew Morton. She talked about this. She says, "It was all very strange. I just felt miserable. I knew the bulimia started the week after we got engaged. My husband put his hands on my waistline and said, 'Oh, a bit chubby here, aren't we?' And that triggered off something in me. And the Camilla thing, I was desperate. I remember the first time I made myself sick. I was so thrilled because I thought this was the release of tension. The first time I was measured for my wedding dress, I was 29 inches around my waist. The day I got married, I was 23 and a half inches. I had shrunk into nothing from February to July. I had shrunk to nothing." Of course, if we know Diana's story, she went into great depths about just basically how in every situation, she would gorge herself with food and then a few minutes later released all of it. And it was just the trauma again of just having to deal with all of those things. And then on top of all of those and all the stuff she had to deal with on the royal level and dealing with the press, having to deal with a husband that did not love her, that did not want to be with her, that was also cheating on her. And then when he realized what was happening, and when she desperately tried to ask for help and tell him this is what's going on, whatever, he told her she was just, she was faking it basically. And he would reject her and go away and either go off to play polo or go off to spend time with Camilla or whatever it is he went off to. He just left her, and she was so desperate, she talked about this. In vain, on that January day in 1982, her first New Year within the royal family, she now threatened to take her own life. He accused her of crying wolf and prepared to go riding on the Sandringham estate. She was as good as her word. Standing on top of the wooden staircase, she hurled herself to the ground, landing in a heap at the bottom. The Queen was one of the first to arrive on the scene. She was horrified, physically shaking with shock at what she had witnessed. A local doctor was summoned, while George Pinker, Diana's gynecologist, traveled from London to visit his royal patient. Her husband simply dismissed her plight and carried on with his plan to go riding. Fortunately, Diana was not seriously hurt by the fall, although she did get some bruises. That's got cut off there a little bit. But a little bit more about what she said happened and what she did and how she was trying to cope. She says the incident was one of many domestic crises which crowded in upon the royal couple in those tumultuous early days. At every turning point, they put a greater distance between each other. As James Gilby observed of her suicide attempts, there were messages of complete desperation. Please, please help. In the first years of their marriage, Diana made several suicide bids and numerous threats. It should be emphasized that they were not serious attempts to take her life, but cries for help. On one occasion, she threw herself against a glass display cabinet at Kensington Palace, while another, she slashed at her wrist with a razor blade. Another time, she cut herself with the serrated edge of a lemon slicer. On yet another occasion, during the heated argument with Prince Charles, she picked up a penknife lying on a dressing table and cut her chest and thighs. Although she was bleeding, her husband studiously scorned her. As ever, he thought she was faking her problems. Later on, her sister Jane, who saw her shortly afterward, remarked on the score marks on her body. Jane was horrified when she learned the truth. As Diana later told friends, there were desperate cries for help. I just needed time to adjust to my new position. One friend who watched their relationship deteriorate points to Prince Charles's disinterest and total lack of respect for her at the time when Diana badly needed help. His indifference pushed her to the edge, and it goes on from there. But it just it's so jarring reading that, and reading it's like you can hear and feel the desperation just jumping through the pages of there. I can't imagine someone in front of me throwing themselves down the stairs, throwing themselves in a cabinet, cutting themselves, doing all of those things, and me just turning away and like, oh, you're just faking it. You see someone like that, and it just speaks to the cruelty of King Charles. It speaks to the cruelty of the royals. I mean, people have talked extensively about how the Windsors are cruel. It's just a stark example of that cruelty. And in a lot of ways, I feel like Diana, even though at the end she didn't feel she got the justice that she deserved, especially what happened to her in the end of her life. But in these ways, to be able to say and to be able to expose and to be able to speak out about what she experienced and what was done to her, and all the ways that she tried to cope. She got some justice in that she was able to let the world know this is what was happening, because at those times the press was attacking her. Charles and his people were attacking her, and they were writing all these horrific things about her in the press. And this was her getting the world to see that, this is what my experience has been. And it's very interesting that she chose these methods, whether it's throwing up or, which turned into bulimia, obviously, as we know, and also include cutting herself. And it's so interesting because for that family, I had no idea that about Charles's experiences with this. And the Daily Mail put out this article, and I'm going to read the other parts of this. There are two parts to this article, and I'm going to read it. It's an article that Charles Spencer himself shared, even though we're not here for the Daily Mail, but that's what he shared. And in this article, it talks about some things that are just like, oh my gosh. It says, in his memoir, the Earl, who attended Madewell Hall near Market Harborough between ages 8 and 13, stated that the matron abused boys in their dormitory beds at night. He described how the alleged abuse and the emotional confusion it caused led to him self-harming and wanted full sex from too early age, with him losing his virginity to a prostitute in Italy. This was such a sad reading. This is something I had to mention about having to jump ahead because I hadn't gotten there yet in the book. But he talked about this matron who was about 18 or 19 at the time when she was working there, would come into, he had been graduated from the younger kids when he started to like sort of like an upper room. And this matron who would come in at night and give the boys these treats that she wasn't supposed to do. They weren't supposed to be eating in their rooms, but she would sneak these treats into the boys. And it would happen when the majority of the kids are sleeping. And because he's a light sleeper, he heard some rustling going on, and then come to find out, I think he got up and come to find out that this matron is in there, and she was having these private times with these other boys. And so he kind of joined in, and he became part of the little group that she would give treats to. And she would go away, and then later on she would come back, and whoever was awake, she would have these conversations with them at their bedsides. Well, these conversations turned into having intimate sexual experiences with her, where she would let the boys touch her in all her private areas, and she would do the same to them. These boys were 11-year-old boys. And he talked about that experience. At 11 years old, it was at a time where he was doing things that 11-year-olds would imagine. They would have no idea. 10 and 11-year-olds at that time in the 70s when this was happening, they would be talking and trying to imagine what these things were like. He at 11 was experiencing it that with her. And as he said, for him, it was too early. And it led him to a place at that early age to want to have full-on sexual relationship. And sadly enough, at age 12 on a vacation in Italy, he lost his virginity to a prostitute, which he talked about was just he just felt empty and cold. And this is a child. And what this woman, assistant matron, I guess, this woman would do is then she would, because she had this power over the boys and they felt like she was the only person there that would give them love. She was the only female presence in their life, in their school year, that would make them feel loved and make them feel appreciated and make them feel like somebody cared. Because every night she came in and she gave them these treats, and then she would have these time with, she's kissing them and doing all of this stuff with them. And then she would manipulate them, where she would love up on one and sort of turn her back on the other. So they're always like competing for her love. And then she told them that, she has to go away. She has to go away before the semester ended. And for the little boys who, with no love in their life, with no anyone who they felt like had any kind of compassion for them, to lose this, or to even think of losing this. I mean, he said all the little boys, and they all knew of each other, but they all fell in love with her because, that was the only love, quote unquote, love they felt they had. And then all of a sudden, for her to drop on them that and she may be leaving, he just spiraled out of control. He was just like, oh my gosh. And so this is a clip of what he wrote in the book. He says, please, they had this crazy thing at the school where all of the women, instead of you calling them by their names, you had to refer to them as please. Yes, the word please. So all the female who worked at Madewell, you call them please. So that's why he referred to her as please. Please told us that she thought she would have to move on to her next job in the women's branch of the Royal Navy early. I was so fraught at the prospect of losing her that I started cutting at the inside of my arm with a penknife. If I hurt myself often and painfully enough, I felt sure that God, fate, whomever, might have grace to let her continue at the school, visiting me, combing my hair back from my forehead. And it's so interesting that in those moments for him, how he tried to cope with losing someone, or losing any kind of the love that he desperately needed, he chose to start cutting himself. And he felt like if only he cut himself, that someone will, let her stay. He learned now, and at that time, he felt like he was in love with this person. It's only now as an adult he realized what she was doing, that she was a pedophile, that she was abusing them. And it turns out that she was not only doing it in this school, she had done it in other schools before. But because Madewell didn't really do references and check references, apparently, this was allowed to happen to little boys. And so he was completely messed up as a child in this way and abused in this way. And not only him, others in his room as well. And he talked about not only this situation, but also with the headmasters and stuff who would abuse boys sexually in the guise of punishing them and hitting them on their bare buttocks, in the guise of punishing them, all for their sexual enjoyment. It was so sick. And so in all of this, him and Diana, when confronted with all of these trauma in their lives, they chose to either throw up or cut themselves, or both. And it's really interesting. Like, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that before, that he had tried to cope with his overwhelming situation in the same way. And then a couple of days ago, on the 23rd, a couple of days ago, Charles Spencer posted this from the Daily Mail article. Woman 67 arrested by police in Earl Spencer child sex abuse probe. And it was like, what? So this is the article that Charles Spencer posted. He says, woman 67 arrested by police in Earl Spencer's sex abuse investigation after Princess Diana's brother says he was molested while at boarding school. The article says a woman has been arrested by police investigating claims by Princess Diana's brother that he was sexually abused by a matron while at boarding school. The 67-year-old woman was arrested a day after North Hampshire police announced that they had opened a criminal investigation into Earl Spencer's allegation that he was molested, aged just 11, at Madewell Hall Preparatory School in the 1970s. In his powerful memoir, A Very Private School, an extract of which was published in the Mail on Sunday in March, Earl Spencer, 60, told how an assistant matron whom he branded a ferocious pedophile groomed him and other young boys. Another clip from the article says, he said that she was about 19 or 20 at the time. The Earl candidly wrote how the matron, whom he did not name, had first kissed me on the lips before she promoted me to the second rank of her reverse harem, those she intimately touched. And the article, goes on to talk about the whole situation about what the police investigation. But it's very interesting that, again, we just started talking about this a couple of episodes ago, and this book came out, and Charles Spencer's been talking about it and talking about his experience and the experience of others in his school, the others who went to school with him. And then the police has now arrested this woman. I could only imagine she probably thought she had gotten away with what she did. For all of these years, she probably thought nothing would ever happen. And then here she is at 67 years old being arrested. I can't imagine what her family must be thinking. But then I think about all the others, the headmasters and all the others. I mean, they were elderly in a way when Charles Spencer was young. So my thinking is that the majority of them have probably passed away. But because this assistant matron was young, she was only about 7 or 8 years older than Charles at the time. She's still here today, and now she is being arrested by the police. So statutes of limitation, I'm assuming, does not expire in the UK as it doesn't in the US. But so it'd be interesting to see this case. But even though the other abusers from that school may have already passed on, I can't imagine how it must feel for Charles to get some semblance of justice for the abuse he suffered at that school at the hands of the adults in that school, who all pretty much knew what was happening and all who either covered it up for whatever reason. But I can only imagine how good it must feel for them to know that, okay, we'll get some justice. And not just for Charles, but a lot of his schoolmates that have suffered the same abuse as him, what they must be feeling when they heard that she was arrested. And so I would have loved for the others who abused them to also have been to be brought to justice. But again, they may have already passed on. But at least in this case, hopefully, it turns out where she, suffered the consequences for what she did to those boys. So yeah, but it's very interesting again that to see this happen just when we're talking about it, and to see, I was just so surprised to see. I mean, I just thought all of them may have died by now, because he is now 60 years old, and so about 60 years old. And so it's just is very much like, whoa, when I saw this article. So anyways, I am happy in a way that, hopefully, fingers crossed, they got some justice. And again, Princess Diana, she died and didn't get the justice I feel like she deserved for what she suffered at the hands of the royal family. But in her own way, by doing Andrew Martin's book, by Martin Brashear's book, a lot of us have little recordings of it. So, they can't do it, can't look at it publicly, but we have little recordings of it. At least we know what happened in her life, and maybe coming out of Harry's court cases that are still alive who have done evil to her. Hopefully, maybe coming out of Harry's court cases, justice will be served, and Princess Diana, even though she is long gone, could get some justice. But my prayer and hope for Charles Spencer is that, we talked about in the last episode, that his latest marriage has ended, and I think he is in therapy, dealing with all of this trauma from his childhood. I do hope that he gets that he gets the help that he needs, that he's able to finally be able to heal from this. Don't know if you could put it in the past or put it behind you, but somehow be able to deal with it and be able to live a healthy life where he can have healthy relationships. Whatever he does, whether it's in a marriage or whatever it is he does, I wish him well. So yeah, it's just very interesting, all of this stuff, and see just the connections with him and Diana, and how And again, they were the youngest of the family, in the family, so they spent the most time together. And to see how very similar they are is just very, very, very interesting. So anyway, that's it. Thank you so much, guys, for just everything that you are. Just thank you so much to our awesome moderators, Lydia Church, Nelly, Karen M, Cookies and Cream, and Black Queen. You are awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to our Two Cents crew who support the channel on a monthly basis. And to all of you who support in the chat, you are amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your support. Anyway, I love you all. Have a fantastic day, and I will chat with you next time. Bye.